The only reason why I mention the Peace of Utrecht and why 1715 is so interesting is because in 1715, Le Roi Soleil, King Louis XIV, dies in 1715. So just a couple years, just like a year or so after the Peace of Utrecht. So, and there's a bunch of rebellion. There's a rebellion in England around this time, and so in 1712 you have a rebellion, a slave revolt in New York, and in 1715 you have a rebellion in England. It seems like there's a lot of like civil unrest happening because of, well, the Enlightenment, honestly, but because things are changing in society. But Le Roi Soleil dies in 1715, and so you have all of these culminations happening in society, which is fascinating. It's fascinating. That's why I'm starting to talk about this stuff, because the history 1700s things start to get very interesting as far as world history, as far as United States history. That's because that's when we start to come into modern history. Things start to change they start to look like our society. That people start to become educated in more modern ways, I suppose, in more ways that look the way that we educate ourselves, and that the masses are allowed to be educated, I suppose. Because before it wasn't allowed that lower classes were as educated as, I mean, they were just the worker classes, they didn't, and you didn't own land, that's for sure. And so there's rebellion. And still, like, to this day, like, it's hard to be educated as a lower class. Like, they make it, there's kind of this shift back to making it difficult for lower classes to be educated. That's why they make the price of higher education difficult, is because there's this constriction on the lower non-land owning masses to not, and that's why you have banks and stuff buying up real estate and stuff. It's because first, they don't want us to own land, and second of all, they don't want us to be educated. Because to rent means that they own us. They want us to be modern serfs. And second of all, the thing that they want us to do is that they want us to, because paying rent is not the same as owning your own house or owning your own land and being a tax-paying landowner. Because traditionally speaking, that means that you have more sway and that you have more of a voice. In democratic sense, in the Greek traditional democratic sense, that meant that you were somebody who was able to vote in Grecian society. Like, there's a lot of sway in owning your own land, even if it's just a plot. It meant that you had a democratic voice, traditionally speaking. Something about owning land just means that you have sway. And there's something about owning earth in a colonial sense, that you have something of value physically. I think they talk about it in that book, Paris in the 1960s, too. He said I don't know what I'm good at. And they said, you could possibly be a landowner. I think that's probably own a plot of earth and be a farmer. He said there's nothing wrong with that. I think he eventually just dies in the book. I don't think he actually dies, because I think that food is so cheap that he just sort of like wastes away and just lives off cheap food and is just miserable. But so the thing about it is, what was my point? They don't want you to own land. That's the traditional speak. As a serf. But that's what you see a lot around this time in 1715, is that you're seeing a lot of like this modernization of people rebelling, people owning land, people becoming educated, people rebelling. And a lot of stuff that we're seeing in this modern day society is this fighting, this rebellion, this civil unrest. You look back at around this early 1700s, I would say that we're probably around the early to mid 1700s, as far as like history repeating itself again. If you look at that time in history, as far as like civil unrest, that I would say that the 2020s, like the early 2020s, where people are getting in the streets, and I don't know if it's quite as bad as that, because they went pretty hard in the 1700s. Like they were gun toting in the streets, and they were literally fighting in the streets, and it was getting pretty strong. So I don't know if we're quite to 1700s levels of rioting in the streets. It's illegal. But the insurrection was definitely a 1700 level rebellion of that was not good. You don't want to get to those levels of because that means that society is breaking down in a sense, and that something is wrong. Although sometimes it's for good, but sometimes it's for bad. It just depends on the situation. The breaking, it means that society is breaking down in a sense. When you have rioting, when you have a situation in which there is a breaking down of society, when people are in the streets, that means that law and order has broken down. And that's what was happening in the early 1700s. You have a breaking down of society, and it goes all the way through most of the 1700s, through in America and in Europe, just all around the atmosphere, is that there's just this breaking down of world societies, and it happens slow and then fast, and then it just, not to be sexual about it, but it's just, it happens because more people are becoming educated, more people are realizing and waking up and going, something's wrong. It's in the air that something is wrong and that things need to change. And I feel like we're in that cycle again, that something is wrong and something needs to change, and we need to do something about this. Doesn't necessarily need a breakdown of society. I don't know. I don't know. I don't have that answer. That's above my pay grade.